call this meeting of the Salina Board of Zoning Appeals for January 19th, 2023 to order. And I'm going to request Shandy confirm that the Kansas Open Meeting Act required notice has been provided of today's meeting.
The packet was posted and the required notice of the meeting was provided.
So we have met our Kansas Open Meeting Act obligations. And so I'm going to proceed with roll call. Board Member May. Is he unmuted?
Yeah, there he goes.
Here.
Board Member Owens.
Here.
Board Member Waters.
Here.
Board Member Troe.
Here.
That is 4 members present. That constitutes a quorum of the Board of Zoning Appeals. But before we move on with today's business, we need to entertain a motion to designate a temporary chair to run today's meeting. So I would open the floor for either nominations or for volunteers to serve as the temporary chair for today's meeting. So if somebody would want to make a nomination or proposed designation for someone to temporarily run today's meeting, we'd open the floor to that.
I'll make a motion for Member Waters to chair.
Okay. Do we have a second for that?
I second that.
All right. We have a motion and a second to designate Carla Waters as our temporary chair for today's meeting. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
That motion passes. So I'm going to turn it over to Chair Waters to consider approval of the minutes and today's business.
Thank you. Okay, item 2.1, approval of the minutes of the December 15th, 22 regular meeting. Have you had a chance to review those? And if so, could I get a motion?
Madam Chair, I move that we approve the minutes as printed.
I have an approval of the minutes of the December 15th, 2022 regular meeting. Do I hear a second?
I'll second.
It's been moved or approved, moved in, seconded to approve the minutes. All in favor, say aye.
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 Motion carried. Okay, moving on into new business.
Carla, Ms. Waters, real quick.
Yes.
If you could pull the mic forward just a little bit. Thank you.
Thank you, Dustin. Okay, moving into new business, public hearing items, application AP 22-1.
Yeah, this is an application that is an appeal of the zoning administrator's denial of a home occupation permit for a bed and breakfast operation. And the location is 229 North 10th Street. And so we're conducting a public hearing on that application for an appeal. And I'm going to turn it over to Spencer Aiken to brief you on that application.
Okay. Good afternoon, Madam Chair and Commissioners. So today's one afternoon agenda item is an appeal application filed by Ms. Vicki Settle, appealing the zoning administrator's denial of a home occupation certificate for a bed and breakfast to be located in an R3 zone at 229 North 10th Street. So section 4260 is the section of the city code that regulates home occupations in residential districts. And it states that a home occupation certificate may be issued by the BZA if the board finds that the proposed use will not have an adverse effect on neighboring properties, and bed and breakfasts are one of the allowed home occupation uses if there are no more than 6 guest rooms, there are no meeting rooms or convention facilities, and provided at least 1 parking space for every 2 guest rooms can be provided on site. In addition to having adequate off-street parking on the property, the city's requirements for bed and breakfast home occupations are a business conducted as an accessory use to a home by members of the family residing on the premises, and bed and breakfast must be operated by a resident of the dwelling or a family member of the property owner. So the house at 229 North 10th Street is a bungalow-style 2-bedroom, 2-bathroom, single-family house on a 5,395 square foot lot. So the house is approximately 952 square feet, and the existing gravel driveway is approximately 693 square feet and measures approximately 17.6 feet wide by 39.4 feet deep. And this meets the minimum requirements for parking for a bed and breakfast home occupation. So in early December 2020, Ms. Vicky Settle contacted city staff to ask about rental requirements in the city. From what she had originally described on the phone, it sounded to city staff that she was looking to have a rooming/boarding house in the city's R3 zone, which is not listed as a conditional or a permitted use. On December 9th of 2022, staff had their first phone conversation with Mr. Parker Montgomery, who is the representative for this case, who asserted that the property could be used for a bed and breakfast because the dwelling has no more than 6 guest rooms, no meeting rooms or convention facilities, and at least 1 parking space could be provided for every 2 guest rooms. Staff communicated to the representative and the applicant that pursuant to the city's home occupation application requirements, that the bed and breakfast home occupations are a business conducted as an accessory use to the home for members residing on the premises, and that bed and breakfast must be operated by a resident of the dwelling or a family member. So the revised appeal application stated that the applicant is willing to act as the on-site manager to satisfy the requirements of the home occupation certificate. And then on December 12th, 2022, the house at 229 North 10th Street was purchased by Ms. Settle. Lastly, because the home occupation application request for a bed and breakfast was denied by the zoning administrator, an appeal application was filed on December 19th, 2022, which requires BZA approval, and that's why we're here today. So Ms. Settle stated that she will manage the bed and breakfast, and stated on the application she would act as on-site manager to satisfy the home occupation certificate requirements. So Ms. Settle will have 1 bedroom available for guests on a reservation basis, and then 1 bedroom available for herself and or family. So Ms. Settle stated that she would provide homemade meals, and that she would serve like pre-prepared things that could be heated up for the guests. The applicant chose this location for a bed and breakfast because of its proximity to downtown Salina and the regional health center, where her main goal is to assist traveling nurses while also providing a location close to downtown for tourists. So the building code requires any guest rooms that have been converted or are proposed to be converted into bedrooms must have an escape window with access directly to the exterior of the building and 5.7 square feet of operable area. So interconnected smoke detectors must also be installed, and the applicants communicated to city staff that both of the existing bedrooms do have an escape window with at least 5.7 square feet of operable area, and that no house additions are planned. Building permit records show that all bedrooms are pre-existing and that no bedrooms have been recently constructed or converted, and that there's no plans to do that. Since the property is classified as a single-family residence, no fire escape or sprinkler system is required. So to the north of this R3 single-family home is the Salina Municipal Court, which is zoned PDD R3. To the east, there's an R3 parking lot and the County Juvenile Detention Center. And then to the south and west, there are R3 single-family dwellings. So for bed and breakfast, the board must find that the use will not cause any adverse effects on neighboring properties. The applicant states that the rights of neighboring property owners won't be negatively affected by the proposed bed and breakfast, as many adjacent property owners are currently renting their properties to guests, and the applicant has not experienced negative results from that. So staff can't confirm whether adjacent property owners are indeed renting their properties to guests because applications for bed and breakfast have not been submitted to the city. However, because this house is on a corner lot and it abuts institutional uses to both the north and to the east, there are limited impacts on adjacent residential properties because there's only single-family homes to the south and to the west. So per section 4260, which is the section that regulates home occupations, one off-street parking space is required for every 2 guest bedrooms, and all parking must be accommodated on the site. So the applicant states that with a 693 square foot driveway, which is about 17.6 by 39.4 feet, and then we have a parking specific plan. Vehicles for guests and the applicant can be easily accommodated on the site. Staff believes that this driveway could accommodate 4 vehicles with at least 8.5 by 19 dedicated to each, although these spaces would be fully stacked if there's 4 cars there. So as stated earlier, any guest rooms that have been converted to bedroom space must have an emergency egress window with at least 5.7 square feet of area. But all bedrooms at this house are pre-existing. The house has 3 existing smoke alarms, a carbon monoxide monitor, and a fire extinguisher, and no fire escape or sprinkler system is required because it's a single-family residence. So the type and nature of activities associated with bed and breakfasts appear to be well suited for residential neighborhoods, and they generally have a low impact on adjacent properties, and that is because the use is conducted almost entirely within the house. No structural alterations to a residence are commonly needed for a bed and breakfast. No display or storage of equipment is often associated with the use. The home business is operated by a resident of the dwelling, where assistance is limited to family members also residing on the premises. And this type, it generally doesn't create much traffic impact. So like stated previously, the applicant has noted she will act as on-site manager in accordance with the bed and breakfast home occupation requirements. However, the owner address listed on the application for the appeal is an address in McPherson, so staff seeks clarification as to whether the property owner will continue living in McPherson or whether she will be living at 229 North 10th Street, and there will be a related on-site manager. So it appears here that the BZA has the following options. So first, the board could direct that a home occupation certificate be issued for a bed and breakfast in this location upon making the required findings of fact that the use and operation will not have no adverse effects on neighboring properties and that adequate on-site parking is provided. The board could direct that a home occupation certificate be issued for the bed and breakfast, subject to additional conditions that would limit any adverse effects on neighboring properties if the required findings of facts can be made. The board could postpone action on this application with the consent of the applicant if additional information is required. Or the board could deny the applicant's request if the required findings of fact can be made that the proposed bed and breakfast will have an adverse effect on neighboring properties. If the board wishes to approve this appeal request, then staff would recommend the following conditions of approval. Number 1, that the property owner or a designated on-site property manager be present on the site for guest visits in accordance to the city's bed and breakfast home occupation certificate requirements as indicated on the appeal application. 2, that the existing driveway be properly surfaced and maintained so as to allow for the off-street parking of at least 3 vehicles within property boundaries. 3rd, that one wall sign of no more than 2 square feet be allowed to advertise the use. Egress windows of at least 5.7 square feet of operable area shall be provided in each guest bedroom. Interconnected smoke detectors shall be installed at locations specified in section R313.2 of the 2016 IRC. And lastly, that any change in the existing parking unloading area for the property be submitted to the planning department for review prior to any changes being made. So that concludes the staff presentation here. We have the applicant in attendance, and staff and the applicant stands by for any questions you may have.
Okay, thank you, Spencer, for the coverage of that. Before we ask the applicant to speak, do we have any questions for staff?
Yeah, on that picture right there.
This
yeah,
one, yes.
Yeah, Is the pavement on the right, is that the neighbor's driveway?
That is the neighbor's driveway, yes.
Okay. So we'll be talking about basically the area that's
Yeah.
doesn't have any grass.
I mean, that's the area. It's kind of hard to tell from the photo, the size of it, but yes,
Okay.
that's it.
Okay, any other questions for staff? Okay, I would ask the applicant to come to the podium and state your name and address.
My name is Vicki Settle, and my address is 1275 Quivira Road in McPherson. And I am the owner and potential operator of 229 North 10th. And according to our insurance, our property in Salina is our second home. So it meets that criteria.
Okay, board, do you have any additional questions for the applicant?
Just the one I have is, now, and I can, correct me if I'm wrong here, but somebody has to actually be staying there?
At the property,
Yes.
that is my understanding, yes. However, my feeling in this property is I am totally in compliance with providing food. That was always the plan before we even knew it was going to be a bed and breakfast instead of a short-term rental. And so there are numerous things that I've put together with that. Because of the way the house is laid out, I think that's a potential invasion of property for any people staying at the house. The 2 bedrooms are back to back. There's an adjoining bath. So the privacy issues are real. If I were staying in 1 bedroom and the guests were staying in an adjoining bedroom, I don't think that's doable. I don't think that would be comfortable for any guest staying in the home. Plus, the primary bath would also be shared. And the rest of the, it's not set up so like a typical bed and breakfast where you could just go ahead and have your kitchen separate from the rest of the property. If it were a 2 or 3 story Victorian, that would be ideal, and I would be totally on board with that. But I definitely think that I can provide the meals, and I always had a plan for cinnamon rolls as they walk in the door, and I have multiple recipes that can be made ahead, put in the refrigerator. We have a complete kitchen in the home. It is fully set up. And so I don't think that's going to be an issue at all. There will be food. It'll be fully stocked. And it's like throw a casserole in the oven in the morning, or just heat something up in the microwave. And there will always be organic farm fresh eggs in the refrigerator, or at least organic. They may be store-bought in this situation just because of the situation, but they'll have a full breakfast.
So Commissioner Tro, if I may, I just want to point out from the city's home occupation certificate that kind of follow up on your question. So here's what it states in regards to being on the premises. So a home occupation is a business conducted as an accessory use to a home by members of the family residing on the premises. The specific regulations governing home occupations are found in Section 4260 of the Salina zoning ordinance, and also subsection F there touches on it. The home business must be operated by a resident of the dwelling. Employees or the other assistants must be limited to intermediate members of the family residing on the premises. And then in Section 4260 of the zoning ordinance, it states you need to have this many rooms, this much parking, So that's the information we have in regards to that.
All righty, thank you.
You're welcome.
All right, any other, go ahead, Rand.
Okay, thank you. So this application would more fit the purpose of a rental unit instead of a bed and breakfast, because there's no resident intended to be at the premises.
Well, the way a bed and breakfast is to be set up is that a bed and breakfast is to be operated by a host, and the host is available on the premises to provide for the needs of a guest. We've had a situation previous where we had some discussions of a historic home on Prescott where the owner resided in Canada, but they wanted to potentially operate it as a bed and breakfast, and so they were going to have an on-site manager to attend to the needs of the guests. The way that Spencer has made the recommendation on page 6, condition 1 says the property owner or designated on-site property manager be present on the site for guest visits. And so the real question is, if there's a site manager, how often or frequently are they there? Are they there daily? If the guest has an issue with plumbing or something not working in the kitchen or something like that, who do they go to if there's not an on-site host residing there? How often or how frequently is the on-site property manager going to be present, and how accessible are they to the guests or residents who have a need? It's really a gray area between this simply being a rental dwelling. With the difference is that it's not designed or set up for someone to enter into a 12-month lease and reside there as a renter. It's more for short-term stays, and so this resides in a gray area, and we have tried to accommodate that by allowing either the property owner or a designated on-site manager to be present, but it's not clear to us how often or how available that on-site manager is to the guests who are staying there, and that kind of needs to be fleshed out, I think, today.
Can I address that?
Yes.
Okay. We live in McPherson, but we are 5 miles south of Lindsborg, so we're not that far away. We have been at this property daily since we purchased it, and it is a quick drive down the interstate. They'll have access to our personal information. We actually have someone in this vicinity that we have visited with about responding to things that we cannot handle that could occur at the house, that would make himself available to be right there as well. But for the most part, my husband and I will be working hand in hand and be readily available. So Rich is self-employed, so he can drop everything and go at will. And so, yeah.
So what would prevent you from operating that unit as like an Airbnb as opposed to a bed and breakfast? Because I've stayed at both.
Sure. Yeah, well, the thing, it's kind of, I don't know how to say this. I was going to say mongrel, but I don't really want to use that term. But it would be like, you still have the breakfast provided for you right there. And the difference would be that there's nobody in your space. So you can get up in the morning and you can go to the kitchen and you can have breakfast and you can be in your PJs, your kids can be running around, and it's your space. And that is a whole different feel than when we've stayed in bed and breakfast. You have to get up, get dressed, and you're going down into a social environment with a lot of other people. This is a single family type home where it lends itself better, I think, to the privacy that would come with having everything there for you and you just being able to prepare it at your will. Or not prepare it, but heat it, because it would already be prepared. So,
But like VRBOs, vacation rental by owner, that is similar to what you seem to be describing.
they don't provide meals that I'm aware of.
Well, maybe not, but would that
Yeah.
better fit the definition of what you plan to do? Because the VRBO has no on-site resident.
If that were the difference, they still have food and do all of that, then that may be the case. But I'm not familiar enough with VRBO to know.
So just to clarify, for the benefit of the board, short-term rentals are not a permitted use within the city of Salina. They're here, they're operating, we don't know where they all are, but they're not permitted. And so there's no mechanism for someone to gain approval of a short-term rental. And so this is the means that we have available to allow this type of operation. And so what we have done is we have conducted or set a public hearing. So we provided notice to neighbors that this is the proposed use of this dwelling, and we've set up this hearing so that the parameters of it can be established. But if it were an option, that is another alternative, but that option is not available in Salina because there's no mechanism presently available to get a permit to have a short-term rental or Airbnb in the city limits.
But having that definition, the on-site resident seems to be the major component of,
It's the major.
for that to happen.
Right. And so we have three terms. We have the term property owner, we have the term resident, and then we have the term which we have used as on-site property manager. And so the applicant in this case meets two of those three criteria. They are not the resident, permanent resident of this dwelling. They are the property owner, and they are the designated on-site manager to, and so having a designated on-site manager as a go-to person for maintenance issues or other issues that arise is what distinguishes this from an Airbnb or a short-term rental, where that is not available.
But the definition of on-site manager to me does not mean the person's living in Lindsborg. The
That-
person's on-site.
Right. That is a judgment call for you as board members. But absent this process, then this is just what we would consider to be transitional or short-term housing. And so this is based on the information that was provided to us by Mr. Montgomery, the attorney. This is the path that we came up with, and it was only during the review period and the notice period that we became aware that this was not going to be the applicant's permanent residence. But it's not the first time it's come up, because we've had it come up on Prescott, where we had an owner that lived in Canada, and then someone living in Canada can't be an on-site property manager because there's no way they can be responsive to needs or issues that arise with their guests. So should this not be approved, then we will have to find a different classification for this use to allow it, because it's certainly rental housing is allowed in the city of Salina. It's just a question of getting the proper land use designation. But the one designation it can't be is a short-term rental or Airbnb, because the biggest distinction and issue with those types of uses is their complete lack of supervision and complete lack of on-site management. And that is what generates the complaints, and that's what generates the need for having specific regulations for short-term rentals, is that there's too many cases where they are not supervised, where there's no on-site manager, where there's nobody to go to resolve a problem.
What is the definition of short term? When you say rentals, we have rentals, but is it
Less of a stay than you would be covered by the Kansas Residential Landlord Tenant Act, so you're not entering into a lease. And so a similar example, it's just that it's on the same property, and there is a house that's located at the corner of South 8th Street and South Street. That house is owned by the Salina Regional Health Center. That house is used by the Salina Regional Health Center to house traveling nurses, traveling doctors. They don't sign a lease. They're not tenants. They're staying there for short periods while they're here filling in as a traveling nurse or traveling medical professional. And so that house is available. It's not a short-term rental. General public can't stay there. You can't book it online. It's owned and managed by the hospital, and the people staying there are staying there for short-term stays. They're not tenants. They're not signing leases as you would under the Kansas Residential Landlord Tenant Act. And as we understand this proposed operation, the owner is not going to be entering into leases with the people that stay here. There's just for short-term stays. They could be traveling nurses. They could be people that are in Salina for a short stay to conduct business. So the distinction is it's generally less than 30 days, and it doesn't come under the Kansas Residential Landlord Tenant Act, where the resident is signing a lease and you have a landlord and a tenant. So it's a short-term stay situation.
It just sounds to me like we're trying to put a square peg in a round hole with this bending and making a convoluted definition to fit the existing applicant, the application. And I was wondering if but it doesn't seem like that unusual kind of use of property.
Right.
And
so the issue here is that we got too deep into the advertising and the notice and everything else before we were clearly informed by the new owners that they had no intention of living here. We'd already advertised it. We'd already set the hearing. We'd already been told repeatedly that they wanted to operate a bed and breakfast. This, you are correct, is not a typical bed and breakfast. It wouldn't fit the state of Kansas's definition for a bed and breakfast. It's a square peg in a round hole. So should you decide as a board this isn't really a bed and breakfast and we shouldn't approve it as such, then the appropriate action would be to not approve it, and then city staff would work with the owners to come up with appropriate land use designation, which would not be a short-term rental. It's probably closer to a rooming house or a boarding house or a home available for short-term stays for traveling professionals than it is a bed and breakfast, because it does not. The state of Kansas has a definition and a license for bed and breakfast. This wouldn't fit that category, and you are correct. We're trying to fit this square peg into a round hole.
So is there more appropriate avenue, or we just have no other avenue but this to allow this kind of use?
Would well, I was thinking, well, maybe planning commission or city commission route would be more appropriate.
Yes, we have to address short-term rentals in any event, and we have that on our list. But our immediate case is we did not seek this out. We didn't make this determination. An attorney who worked for the owners decided this was a bed and breakfast, told us it was, and we proceeded on that and advertised it as such, and that's why we're here. And only in the middle of the process were we informed that it was not a traditional bed and breakfast operated by the owner of the premises. So I can recount, and we can document that we've had 6 or 7 bed and breakfasts approved in the city of Salina by this board. Every single one of them was operated by the property owner who resided there as the host. We were caught off guard when we learned that that was not an intention to do this, but we've advertised the hearing. We sent notice out to people. We're conducting this hearing today, and you are completely within your discretion as a board to say, you know what? This doesn't really fit a bed and breakfast, so we're not going to approve this, but the use itself seems reasonable. So staff, why don't you work with these owners to classify this and allow them to operate this the way they wish to? It's just calling it a bed and breakfast is putting a square peg in a round hole.
I guess my thought right now is, if we were to approve this, other than what you've stated, is there going to be a larger impact?
There's not going to be any. The impact on the neighborhood is going to be the same. It's self-limiting because it's a relatively small house and it has 2 bedrooms. So
I mean, on the city at large, or
no, we just it's hard to explain. Spencer is new here. He's working on this case. He came to me no less than 10 times with this information, trying to get a handle on this. The attorney who was handling this insisted that this was a bed and breakfast and that they wanted to submit this application. It's only in the middle of the stream where it changed, and now we were faced with a situation. We don't want to deny the use of this property,
right?
but at the same time, it's somewhat disingenuous to ask you to conclude that this is a bed and breakfast. So if you're not comfortable with the on-site manager concept, which is not necessarily consistent with a home, the whole point of a home occupation is if you're operating a beauty salon in your home, you have to live there. If you take a home and put a beauty salon in it and no one lives there, it's not a home occupation. It's then a commercial venue. This is not a commercial venue. It's just providing rental accommodations to people who don't want to sign a lease and don't want to stay for an extended period. It's no different than what Salina Regional Health Center is doing with the house at 8th and South. It's just that is an accessory use to the hospital's operation. And here this isn't accessory to anything. It's just freestanding, and it's not limited to nurses and doctors. It could be anyone who wants to take advantage of this type of stay and have breakfasts and things furnished. So the
If somebody comes in for the car show, they could stay there. Or,
right.
you know.
So you're speaking to the fact that essentially staff, the planners on staff, have been put in a round hole, and we have a peg that we're trying to make fit. And so the bed and breakfast tool is probably not the right tool, but if we have an attorney and they insist they want to apply for a bed and breakfast, we're going to accept the application under the assumption that the attorney knows that the operator of the bed and breakfast has to reside there. And that's not the case here. So if this were to be denied as not meeting the occupancy requirements of the ordinance, then we would work with the new owners to come up with a zoning designation that would allow this to occur. And it could be as simple as saying it's a rooming house. Yeah. No, it's permitted use.
Can I say something?
Yes.
We never stated that we would be staying in the property with the guest. That was never our intent. So
Did you tell your attorney that?
he was very aware of what our plan was.
So he did you a disservice then by continuing the process a different direction.
I mean, I don't understand your question, basically. Our plan was always to provide food, even before it was a bed and breakfast, for the guests staying in our home. And that was always the plan. Our plan was never that we would stay in the home with our guests. I mean, it's not set up that way. It would not be a good arrangement.
All right, thank you. Are there any more questions for staff or the applicant? Okay, do we have anyone from the public who wishes to speak?
We do not appear to have anyone online, so anyone who is interested in speaking would be in the room.
All right.
So before we bring it back to the board for action, I'm just going to read this definition from the Salina ordinance, referring to rooming houses, is a single-family residential dwelling with one kitchen used to provide lodging for 1 week or longer for compensation with or without meals for persons each with a private room, excluding the resident owner or occupant and family thereof. So if you decide, and staff certainly agrees, that this is not, all we can conclude is that the attorney did not read or understand the ordinance, because in their application they said that this application, the original application, that they would satisfy all the conditions for a home occupation certificate, and that's not true.
Did that definition that you just read say that there was a resident owner?
No, it just says that each of the residents would have their own private room, excluding the resident. There's a limit that a rooming house can't have more than 8 persons.
Okay.
But that total of 8 excludes the resident owner or occupant and family thereof.
Okay.
It's the reason that short-term rentals are so challenging is because short-term rentals, a short-term rental is and should be taxed as a commercial property because nobody is residing there. And it seems it's often something that is missed, but in the state of Kansas, residential properties are taxed at 11.5% of the appraised value. Commercial property is taxed at 25% of the appraised value. And in order to qualify as a residential property, somebody has to live there. And so if you have a short-term rental, one, that is a commercial property and not a residential property because it's not someone's permanent home. And the second thing is that people who stay in short-term rentals should be remitting hotel and motel guest tax to the municipality in which it resides because they're providing the same services as a hotel or inn or bed and breakfast. And that is, it's even a little gray area in Kansas, but a licensed bed and breakfast is supposed to remit hotel, motel guest tax to the city and the state because it's considered to be lodging, not a home. And so that is the best analogy for why we are here, is because we have a square peg, round hole situation. We can't approve this as a short-term rental because those aren't allowed. We can't approve it as a bed and breakfast. So the best that we could try to do is to take this and pound it into the shape of a rooming house or rooming and boarding house, and that would be the best means for us to do it. But since the attorney filed this application, we had to do something with it. And we had to advertise it. We had to bring it here for a hearing. And you are perfectly within your rights as board members to ask us what the heck we're doing bringing this to you. So,
All right, does the board have any more questions for staff or the applicant? Commissioner May, do you have any questions?
No, thanks, Dean, for clarifying all that. I agree.
Mm-hmm. All right, I bring it back to the board for discussion or a motion.
So I wanted to clarify that if the board chose option 4, which would be to deny the appeal for the proposed bed and breakfast, you're not denying the applicants their use of the property. You're just saying that, in your opinion, this doesn't meet the criteria to be a bed and breakfast. So
I think this application does not fit the definition of bed and breakfast as was stated in the application, and that we would be doing a disservice possibly to the city because there might be other unintended consequences that could come up if we did otherwise, if we tried to make the peg fit in the hole. And so I would not be in favor of this application. I would encourage the applicants to come back with a different form and possibly make that work better.
Yeah, I would agree that we need to keep working on it and get something that does fit, but I personally would see no reason why we couldn't approve this. But for future reference, you're absolutely right in what you're saying.
So I have a motion to deny the applicant's request, however, work with city staff for other avenues. And do I hear a second?
I'll second.
I have a motion and a second to deny application AP 22-1 and work with the city staff for finding other avenues for this property. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Motion carries.
nay.
Oh,
Got one nay.
4-1. Okay, thank you. Okay, moving on to administrative items. 3.2, the presentation of the 22 annual report.
Thank you, Ms. Waters. We have the Salina City Commission has a number of boards and commissions that it appoints, and its main hope or expectation is that people who are appointed to boards are active, that the boards are active, that the members they appoint are attending those meetings. And so they have asked that each of the boards that they have created prepare an annual report of their activities. And so we have prepared this report for you to review and to consider passing on to the City Commission on your behalf. And so we've indicated that there were 13 variance cases and 1 appeal filed in 2022. That compares to 9 a year ago. There were no administrative variances that were filed. You're scheduled to meet the 3rd Thursday of each month, so that's 12 regularly scheduled meetings, and you held 10 of those 12 meetings, which meant you were fairly evenly busy the entire year. So you only had 2 meetings where you didn't meet due to lack of agenda items. We had a couple variances that involved sign size requests, and those were both denied. The most common requests that the board gets are requests for setback variance relief, and then last year you also had 2 variances that dealt with the required amount of off-street parking. The most recent of one was for the Lee Lofts property on North Santa Fe. So we have provided a summary of the comings and goings in 2022 on the board. This board currently has 6 appointed members. There's no youth member appointed, so we still have 1 opening on the board. But what we would ask you to do is to look at Exhibit B, your attendance, and if you think we have been inaccurate or misstated something on there, you should bring that to our attention. And then we have just the membership roster of who was on the board in 2020 and the contact or mailing address that we have to get information out to you. If any of that is out of date or inaccurate, we'd ask you to bring that to Shandy's attention either during the meeting or after the meeting. But we provided this with a summary of what you did in 2022 and would just ask you to look at attendance and see if you agree or disagree with anything there. And if there's no comments or questions, then we would just need a motion to forward this report on to the City Commission on your behalf.
Okay, any questions of staff? Do I hear a motion?
I'll make a motion.
I'll second it.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded to present this 2022 annual report of the Board of Zoning Appeals to the City Commission. All in favor say aye.
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 Okay, motion carries 5-0.
We don't have any further business for you this evening. I don't know, I can't speak for certain as to whether you will have a February meeting or not. I don't think we have any current applications that have already been scheduled, but we will let board members know once we know there's no items and the meeting will not be held. We'll send out an alert to you saying that the February meeting will not be held, so you can plan ahead.
Okay, thank you. Do I hear a motion for adjournment?
So moved.
Do I hear a second?
Second?
Moved and seconded to adjourn. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Motion
Aye.
carries 5-0.